Man, I don't even really know how to start this one. Like, deadass, I even wrote that shit in the script. I really do think that Fujimoto just got tired of this story and of these characters. I honestly think you can even pinpoint where this feeling began to manifest in the story. I'd say it really started when the focus shifted away from Asa and went back to Denji. To me, this is really where the story seemed to lose its footing, but I'm not going to act like it was immediately bad after that. The whole sequence against the Age Devil was really good in my opinion. It allowed Denji to really feel the weight of his actions and almost just allow himself to become a tree, a fate that he viewed both as a form of punishment as well as an escape from having to confront the consequences of his reality. I also really enjoyed Yoru realizing her full potential through the vehicle that is America's unending bloodthirst for war. America reinventing nukes worked to both feed into the fear of war and thereby strengthen Yoru, as well as to serve to show another example of how fears destroyed by Chainsaw Man can naturally return. And this development only happened a few chapters before the ending. Fujimoto is known for having very abrupt endings that come as momentum is being built. But there really was too much going on for everything to just simply be wrapped up there. And even then, we could have at least gotten an ending that wrapped up the main characters' stories. A massive issue with this ending is how it completely invalidates Asa as a character. You can argue we got the end of her and Yoru's arc with their dialogue in chapter 229, but that really isn't enough, in my opinion. Asa has been neglected the focus for so long, and it doesn't help that Yoru had completely taken over her body for the final conflict. Asa only indirectly contributes to Yoru giving up, due to how Asa's feelings have left a tangible impact on Yoru. Aside from them literally sharing a body, this development continues to show how relationships change people, and how the experiences of the people close to us can have a deep impact on our own outlooks and experiences. And while this is nice, it just isn't enough. Asa isn't given the opportunity to do anything in this final conflict. The focus is completely removed from her to the point where a lot of the final chapters only feature Yoru. Asa is reduced to like a text bubble at most. I'm not trying to dictate what an author can or cannot write, but generally speaking, this is not how a main character should be treated. And yes, Asa is at the very least one of the main characters, if not the intended main character of this part. But the worst part about it is that Pochita deleting himself for Denji's sake does nothing for Asa and deletes her entire story. This is just not it. It's true that the overall story of Chainsaw Man is about Denji, and Pochita's role in the story is ensuring Denji can accomplish his dreams. More broadly, Pochita allows Denji to continue living. I'm not saying it makes no sense for Pochita to do what he does in the ending, but it does make no sense for Fujimoto to have this be the resolution when it completely erases everything Asa went through, as well as, of course, erasing everything Denji went through. One saving grace against this I've heard is based on the idea that the universe corrects itself to make up for any idea that Chainsaw Man deletes. Because of this idea, memories and experiences from the original timeline subtly continue into the new timeline. This is definitely supported by how a lot of similar events happen in the new timeline without Chainsaw Man and without the original context, like Denji and Power becoming friends, or even Denji and Asa meeting. This also lines up to an extent with how we've seen erased concepts depicted previously in the series, like with the Ear Devil. As much as this idea ties neatly into how Pochita/Chainsaw Man operates in this series, and in a quaint way sort of says it all would have happened anyway, it still robs the meaning behind how everything happened. Denji and really all of the characters in this series are who they are because of the experiences that they went through. More than any other series, Chainsaw Man does a brilliant job at conveying this. From the aforementioned example where Yoru stops fighting because of how Asa changed her as a person, to how Denji changes with the introduction, time spent with, or loss of important people in his own life, like Aki, Power, and Nayuta, these characters are defined by each other. In this reset ending, we aren't even shown most of the characters, so your guess is as good as mine as to whatever happened to them. What happened to Himeno's friendship with Aki, or Aki's relationship with Angel? Where the hell is Kishibe? Not all of these questions necessarily need to be answered, but the larger point is that the history of these characters, the most important and core part of their identity, has been erased. It's pretty difficult to get across the idea that, even in different circumstances, fate would remain the same. Because, no, not really. Again, I think it's a quaint idea, but a difficult one to justify most of the time. The explanation that the experiences of these characters still persist in the reset versions is nice, but even with the presented evidence, it doesn't really show. For the most part, it really does just appear that all these characters have regressed into who they were at the beginning of the series, with only slight nods at the original memories. And even then, I'd be willing to accept this if there was actually a good reason for a reset in the first place. I think a really strong suit of this series has always been how it shows that even the most important people in your life are temporary. Okay, putting it that way sounds fucked up. I don't just mean that these people will die, but also that they may not always be a part of your life. Losing people like that in any form hurts. But you might find new people after that. And they, if they're alive, may find new people too. It's not that their absence stops hurting, but life does move on. Denji loses all of his friends by the end of part 1, but gains a sibling in Nayuta and eventually a friend and potential romantic partner in Asa. I guess what I mean to say here is that despite the escalating stakes of the conflict on a surface level, at an emotional level I do not believe Denji was unrepairable. Asa was still alive and both of them could have gone on to live better lives. Of course, being Chainsaw Man is what gets in the way of Denji living a good life. Instead of focusing on improving his life as Denji, he is addicted to being this ideal version of Chainsaw Man that ultimately he could never be. This imbalance between the version of himself who is learning to fit into society and a version of himself that the world loves but isn't true to who he really is leads him to regress as a person. Many people think Denji's story in part 2 is just about addiction, but I really think a larger theme of his conflict in both parts is about living for other people's expectations rather than for himself. And to be even more precise, living for what feels good at a surface level rather than what is actually fulfilling. To that end, removing the performative part of Denji from him does make sense for resolving this conflict, but we don't get there through Denji realizing it. Denji eating Makima not as Chainsaw Man, but just as himself at the end of part 1, conveyed to us that he wants people to care about him for being him, not just for being Chainsaw Man. Denji made this choice, acting on those feelings. It's why that ending worked so well. We don't see Denji even really being aware of this in part 2's ending. Granted, this is because he regressed, but that takes me to a larger point I have about this ending. Having a character regress is not bad writing, because regression is a natural part of growth. Getting better as a person isn't this linear thing. It has hurdles and pitfalls. People don't just get better and better, a lot of the time they do get worse. And when people regress, it can certainly feel like things would be better if they went back to how they were before, but no one can just hit reset in real life. The despair of regression has to be dealt with head on, and while it can feel cyclical or even impossible to get better, it really isn't the end. The lessons that had already been learned don't just disappear, even if a person is temporarily blinded to them. I'm not trying to say life is full of ups and downs, or even that Denji could just magically get better, but again, on an emotional level, I don't think the stakes were impossible to overcome. especially since part 2 isn't even the first time Denji has regressed as a person. Granted, he definitely got a lot worse in part 2 than in part 1. Ultimately, Denji could still have grown past this, especially with the help of Asa, and continue living on having accepted life's consequences. In a weird way, I feel like this sort of ending would have worked fine in the context of part 1, but with the expansion of the story in part 2, a reset ending like this that spiritually invalidates the whole journey can really make the entire edition feel meaningless. That being said, I think that saying part 2 is meaningless is kind of just bad faith and very reactionary. The ending wasn't great, but I don't think it actually invalidates everything that happened up to that point. This ending doesn't just magically erase my real-life memories of enjoying both parts of this manga series. If it does for you, then Fujimoto might be the greatest author of all time, turning the power of Chainsaw Man into an actual reality. As mentioned earlier, I really think Fujimoto just kind of lost his love for this series, and I can't really blame him. Working on one story for that long is almost a guarantee for burnout. As a creative, the joy of creation comes from making new things, and so being forced to just work on one thing can be a real pain. It really isn't surprising, the sheer amount of long-running shonen manga that ended up having bad endings. I almost wonder if part 2 would have been better as its own standalone series. Though, granted, it would kind of lose a lot of the meaning if it were. Even if it wasn't, I certainly would have still loved if Asa remained the main character the whole way through, with Denji being to her what Power Naki were to him in part 1. Something like that could have been a real treat. Whatever the case, I still love this series. So, thank you, Chainsaw Man. Because, I like chainsaws and men.